weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here, and the speculation persists in just about every direction. And because it does, it seems to me it speaks to my general criticism of Trump's handling of the Epstein matter, which is if you're not going to live up to the promise that was made pre-election and the pre-installment of your people at Department of Justice, at FBI, then you need to provide a cogent explanation of why. And it may be along the lines of some of the speculation that is being bandied about, but you have to make it. You can't just do the, I don't like people fighting, stop it, we're moving on. Or this is all you get and we're moving on, we're not taking questions. Trump posting on Truth Social over the weekend, what's going on with my boys, and in some cases gals. They're all going after Attorney General Pam Bondi. He's doing a fantastic job. We're on we're on one team, MAGA, and I don't like what's happening. We have a perfect administration, the talk of the world, and selfish people are trying to herd it all over a guy who never dies, Jeffrey Epstein. And he goes on to suggest that the so-called Epstein files, which, by the way, he called for to be released too, were actually written by Obama, Hillary, Comey, Brennan, and all the losers and criminals of the Biden administration. Just another hoax. Well, that's at odds with what Alan Dershowitz says. It's at odds with what Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, and perhaps even Pam Bondi, although her words were more couched, believed prior to taking office. And it seems to me, if you say, well, here's what we thought, here's what I thought, and here's what I found, and it's different. Like, for example, their concession, I'm talking about Kash and Bongino, that Epstein committed suicide. That doesn't sit well with some Trump supporters. But they basically said, look, we had questions. From what we've seen, the questions have been answered, and we now conclude that he did commit suicide. And then you move on, and there's still questions that persist, particularly when you present videotape that ends up having been edited a couple of times. It wasn't the raw footage, apparently, according to an analysis by Wired Magazine, that it was presented as being. So when you're not accurate, fully accurate, that creates more impetus for conspiracy theories. One line of argumentation I saw in response to my critique of the Miranda Devine column that we talked about with Scott Jennings for a bit. Trump and Kash, et cetera, public said they're going to release files when they get into office. You think the people keeping them suppressed would just leave them behind? If the files were actually secret pedo tapes and blackmail evidence against billionaires and politicians, and not just Epstein abusing kids, why would the corrupt FBI rats or intelligence in the Biden administration protect those files, leaving behind the files so that Trump can use them and or reveal them to the public? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Oh, okay. Well, my response is, okay, well, if that's true, why would they leave them behind? Trump announced that they were going to release them, and they could be incriminating to people that are in Biden's orbit. So, of course, they took them with or destroyed them or what have you. Well, then why don't they just say so? Why wouldn't they just say so? Why wouldn't Trump and Bondi just say so? What we thought we had, we don't have. It seems to us that the files or evidence was either taken or destroyed, and we're looking into it. Because to say that, if that's really what happened, one line of speculation, that would put the onus on Biden and Wray and company. So to not say it, if that has any basis in truth, that's what seems ill-considered to me. That's what I'm talking about. A credible alternative explanation for why you're not producing what you promised to produce, whether it is because it's not there, because it was not what you anticipated it would be, because you're still investigating, because you're using information to bigger and better ends, and you're going to have to trust me on this, or I can give you some perspective, but it's a pending matter, and you'll have to process it after and make your own decision about my judgment after we've concluded this effort? That's not what we're getting. For more on this, pleased to be joined by Thomas Baker, retired FBI special agent and legal attaché, and author of The Fall of the FBI, How a Once Great Agency Became a Threat to Democracy. Thomas Baker, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you again this morning, Dan.
So, your take on this whole Epstein dilemma?
Well, as regards the Epstein dilemma, I would like to comment that your explanation these last 2 or 3 minutes, your explanation is excellent. It's measured. It touched on all the issues and problems with it. And my synopsis would be quite in line with your critique. The handling of it has been a public relations disaster for Trump and his administration, and for Pam Bondi's DOJ, and for Kash Patel's FBI. And really, it's the only major criticism I have of any of them since they've been in office. And it's a damn shame, and it was avoidable, and that's what makes it a public relations nightmare.
The theories that are being bandied about, and there's some circumstantial evidence to some of them, including that Epstein was essentially a cutout, or somebody that the CIA used to do things that it couldn't do, potentially dating all the way back to Adnan Khashoggi in the 80s and in Arms for Hostages, Iran-Contra. What sort of credibility do you give those theories in terms of explaining how Epstein was able to amass the fortune he amassed, operate the way he operated, get a sweetheart deal back in West Palm in the first decade of this century that he got? I mean, all of that. It just seems like it was impossible for him to do all the things he did without some sort of state sanction.
Well, there are a lot of very dynamic entrepreneurs and financiers. And Epstein, in fact, in his finance business, had a couple of really good clients. This one man, I'm sorry to say his name escapes me, he had a woman's clothing and lingerie company for years.
Wexner, yeah.
Had blind faith in Epstein and gave him hundreds of millions of dollars to manage. So that's part of the financial explanation. He had several clients like that. And there's no reason to believe that those people were involved in the sexual exploitation of women and girls or children. The other speculation is plausible based on what I know about the wide-ranging tentacles of the CIA around the world. It's quite plausible that the CIA at some point used or contacted Epstein as a source of information and perhaps as an operational person at some point. Bear in mind, he traveled internationally. He had places in the Caribbean. He had places in London. He came in contact with a lot of decision makers. He's the kind of person legitimately the CIA would have contacted, would have tried to exploit and develop. And perhaps Epstein being such a conniver, I think we can agree with that he might have cut a good deal with them to give him a little more freedom, a little more leverage in operating in certain countries and certain areas in the past. None of that's proven, but it's plausible speculation. The other explanation, which Trump and Pam Bondi should have given in a more cogent fashion, is that all the many files have been reviewed. She allegedly had dozens and dozens of people working on the review, and that there is no there there. They could have said it more cogently without getting themselves in the mess that they're in now.
But they also have to answer the question, and they didn't really answer it. I mean, it's the obvious one. Okay, if there's no there, then why is Ghislaine Maxwell sitting in prison for 20 years for sex trafficking? She was trafficking all these women just to herself and Jeffrey Epstein? That doesn't seem plausible.
Well, you're absolutely right. Here's the challenge. Here's the reality. There was several federal investigations, FBI investigations of him, going all the way back to the case in Florida dozens years ago, where he got a sweetheart deal at the end of the line, to the investigations in New York, to the major investigation, and this is key, of his death in federal custody in the Federal House of Detention in New York City, which some people immediately suspected, oh, this is a jailhouse killing, because this guy could rat out dozens of key powerful people. Bill Barr was still Attorney General when that happened. The Federal Bureau of Prisons is a component of the DOJ. Bill Barr was, in fact, furious about this death.
Right.
And he had it investigated, and they investigated the hell out of it. And in the end, he concluded, which none of us were happy with, but it was the conclusion he came to, is that it was just a series of blatant screw-ups and mistakes by the Federal Bureau of Prison authorities in New York City. There were two people literally asleep at the switch, who should have been watching this guy. He should have been on suicide watch. For a long time, they had a nonviolent criminal as a cellmate with him, and that's a good practice when someone is suspected of being a suicide possibility. But he was left alone in one cell by himself. The people who should have been watching him were literally asleep. So there's all those errors, and then there's this weird thing with that Pam Bondi tried to explain with the tape that's recording out in the whole corridor, that it goes blank 1 minute every 24 hours as it switches back over. That could have been explained better. So Bill Barr's investigation was extremely thoroughgoing, and he wanted to uncover any possibility that this guy might have been murdered. And what he uncovered was a lot of shortcomings and screw-ups by the Federal Bureau of Prisons. He used the phrase, I forget, it was just a perfect storm of mistakes that were made that allowed him, and the conclusion was, take his own life, which is not a far-fetched thing. Somebody like him facing prison for the rest of his life and being the despicable person that he is and the amoral person that he would have taken that way out. That could have been explained better. There are, as I say, these undoubtedly thousands of pages of documents from the 2 or 3 separate FBI investigations that went on. Now, here's the problem they do have. In all fairness, there are undoubtedly dozens of people, and probably hundreds and maybe thousands, who were interviewed in the course of those 3 investigations, who are totally innocent people, or at least people that a case could not be brought against. And it's longstanding DOJ policy that you're not supposed to, which of course Comey and Brennan and Wray even violated, but you're not supposed to name somebody or besmirch somebody who you don't intend to charge. That's just a good policy they've had over the years. And there are undoubtedly hundreds of people like that, including Trump, including, you mentioned Professor Dershowitz. He was mentioned in this matter at all, and he denies the what he calls false allegation against him. So they're really in a bad spot. There's a lot they can't release, but they could if they wanted to, and if somebody made a Freedom of Information request, undoubtedly people have, they could expedite it, and there'd be a lot of redaction of people's names, but they could release all the files with all the redaction. It would be a monumental thing, but they could do it. And then, of course, people would pick and forever, and people, just like the Kennedy assassination, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, people will be still picking at this and speculating.
Well, that's right, because you're not getting full disclosure on the front end, so that's why it goes on for decades and decades. I mean, it's even just like answering questions, like I mean, like literally a open forum. Ask your questions. I mean, just obvious ones like, did you talk to victims? There's no one that you could make a case out. Did you re-interview, or did you pour through all the evidence that would implicate people who've been accused publicly, like Prince Andrew? And you determined that there wasn't a case there. I mean, that's a question. I don't know, but it seems to me like those are the sorts of questions that they need to provide answers to.
Well, you're absolutely right, and that's a way they could do it. But at the end of the day, they've mishandled it terribly, I'm sad to say. But at the end of the day, there may be no there in terms of a black book,
Mm-hmm.
a little black book with the men who were taking advantage of these women and girls. Undoubtedly, I mean, there's so much circumstantial evidence around the travel and the planes going to this island, and what a number of women and girls said happened to them there.
Mm-hmm.
This monkey business, and that's even too gentle a term for it, monkey business, it's worse than that, was going on. The other thing you have is the nature of the victims. Sad to say, a lot of the victims themselves, and I'm not besmirching the victims, but a lot of the victims are unstable, emotionally unstable. They've been scarred, or they were weak, emotionally weak people to begin with. That's why they were exploited. That's what made their exploitation so relatively easy. So a lot of those people don't want to be on the spot, don't want to be involved. But it could. Dan, you're absolutely right. It could have handled it a lot better. And I think it's unfortunate and distracts from other things.
You're just on another topic. Your assessment of the announcement of a criminal investigation into Comey and Brennan, and it seems to be in the direction of both of those two individuals perjuring themselves and maybe even conspiring to commit perjury. Do you see that going anywhere?
That's something more important. Well, in my personal opinion, even more important, I'd like to talk about. Yes, I'd like to see it go somewhere. It may not, because of time having gone by. I feel very strongly about that effort because it kind of vindicates a lot of stuff I said in my book. John Durham, the special counsel who looked at the origin of the Russian collusion investigation, issued a report, 300 pages, I believe, and he charged only 3 people. And a lot of the liberal critics of the president and of Durham, and who are defenders of Brennan and Comey, have said, well, John Durham looked at this and only charged 3 people. Well, John Durham also issued a report, and his report went over everything and said clearly, number one, there was no reason whatsoever to initiate the Russian collusion investigation of the Trump campaign, that the FBI particularly, because Durham's report focused on the FBI and the DOJ, Durham's report said that there was absolutely, that they had a lack of fidelity to the law. That's his bottom line. Now, what it looks like we're speculating now, but what it looks like in the current criminal investigation that's just been initiated, we were told last Wednesday officially that it was initiated, is perhaps John Brennan and maybe Comey lied to Durham in his investigation, and there's still some time for that, or that Durham lied in some of his testimony, Brennan lied in some of his testimony to one or more congressional committees. Whether they'll be able to prove that at this late date is not known, but what this investigation will show, again, I believe, and confirm again, and as I said, confirm a lot of the things I said in my book, that there was a conspiracy. Brennan, who escaped a lot of criticism, was hardly mentioned in the Durham report. Brennan clearly led the FBI into this investigation. He planted the breadcrumbs himself. That is now well documented. And that's a terrible abuse of the CIA and a terrible abuse of our justice system. And that's what I think history will accuse James Comey and John Brennan of: abuse of authority, terrible abuse of authority. Whether or not there's enough for a criminal charge remains to be seen.
One more report, and that was this weekend. Senate Homeland Security Committee's report on the failed assassination attempt on President Trump last year in Butler, Pennsylvania. We find that there was information prior to the July 13th rally, 10 days prior, that Secret Service officials became aware of a threat to then former President Trump, but they couldn't figure out how to share classified information with local partners. The committee also concludes, something Susan Crabtree at RealClearPolitics.com has been reporting on. Not a single person has been fired. The committee believes more than 6 individuals should have received disciplinary action as a result of their action or inaction. Those who were disciplined received penalties far too weak to match the severity of the failure. So here again, we're looking for accountability with a catastrophic and almost much more catastrophic failure, but a man still lost his life that day, the fireman. Catastrophic failure by Secret Service, and nobody really gets held to account.
Well, Dan, what's beyond disgraceful, what's surprising about all those findings and what actually happened that day is that a lot of these issues, and I'm not exaggerating now, were resolved, procedures were resolved 20 and 30 and 35 years ago between the federal agencies and the state and local agencies. And I'll just mention one or two very quickly. You mentioned that they didn't know how to convert this classified information in a form to disseminate to the state and locals. Well, that's been resolved years ago. You have undoubtedly in the Pennsylvania State Police and probably in the city of Pittsburgh, which was a nearby major city, you have officers who've been cleared to top secret clearance who are on joint terrorism task forces. That's the whole purpose of that, number one. And the federal agencies, Secret Service as well as the FBI and others, have been disseminating. DEA does it routinely, classified information, unclassifying it, and getting it out to the state and locals in a classified or unclassified form. So that's one thing.
So wait, just hold there. So that when the Secret Service says they had, this is a quote from the report, had no process to share classified threat information with partners when the information was not considered an imminent threat to life. You're saying they actually do have a process. That's false.
And there's been a process for 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, okay.
And that's what I find. I mean, it's not just shocking. It's totally surprising. It's unbelievable. There's been a process in place for years. The other thing there's been a process for, two other major findings of that report. Number one, there was no joint command center for that major event. That's something that's been established operational procedures between the federal FBI or Secret Service and state and locals for years. You always want to have a joint command post where you have people sitting in the same room from these different agencies. You got a county police there, and county sheriff's office, a local police. Then you got the state police and others. They should all be sitting in the same room in a command post somewhere. That didn't exist. That's been standard law enforcement practice in America for 20 or 30 years at least. And then the other thing they mentioned, they had no common channel. The Secret Service could not communicate with the Pennsylvania State Police or the local police on the scene who were seeing different things and did see some stuff early on. That's another thing. 35 years ago, police cars and FBI cars in America with their Motorola radios way back when, they always had a common channel. They talked to their own people on channel 1 or 2, for instance, and there was always a channel 3 or 4 that was a common channel between the state police and the FBI in every state of the nation. 30 years ago, we had that. And so just for this purpose, in an emergency, you could talk to each other. And they said in this report the Secret Service didn't have that on the scene. What the hell's wrong with the Secret Service? I mean, they have let things slip, and it's a shame because they were always thought of years ago as a very elite force with some very polished guys. And boy, that has slipped terribly.
Thomas Baker, retired FBI special agent and legal attaché, author of The Fall of the FBI, How a Once Great Agency Became a Threat to Democracy. Thomas Baker, thanks so much. As always, appreciate your time.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for your clear analysis.
Thank you. And